This morning, Iran buried Admiral Ali Reza Tangsiri, the commander of its navy, who was assassinated in an Israeli airstrike. But the more leaders they kill, the harder it may be for their successors to communicate openly with each other and agree with the Americans any eventual deal on peace. State media now calls this admiral the Emperor of the Sea, because he was the Revolutionary Guard commander who gave the order by walkie-talkie to close the Strait of Hormuz. It's closed to America forever, says the commentary above, and it will never be open to them again. You can see that the Admiral's successors have gone underground, because none of today's mourners were wearing Revolutionary Guard uniforms, no doubt trying to evade being identified as targets by Israeli spies. Their goal is to hold the global economy hostage by keeping the strait closed, persuading President Trump to end this war, for Iran's Islamic regime to survive it, even as America's so-called Secretary of War claims the regime is already dead.
This new regime, because regime change has occurred, should be wiser than the last. President Trump will make a deal he is willing, and the terms of the deal are known to them. If Iran is not willing, then the United States War Department will continue with even more intensity.
But the Iranians are still fighting as well. One of their drones holing this Kuwaiti tanker close to the port of Dubai, driving a wedge between America and its Gulf allies, as well as driving up the price of oil. And a rift is widening between America and Europe too. Italy is refusing to allow American military aircraft to refuel at this airbase in Sicily. Another NATO member, Spain, has closed its airspace to the Americans, as well as the use of its bases. And this morning, President Trump accused France of preventing weapons bound for Israel from flying through French airspace. The president is so angry that he's reportedly thinking of ending the war, even if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. And on social media, Mr. Trump once again lashed out at the UK. If you refuse to get involved and are short of fuel, he wrote, build up some delayed courage, go to the strait and just take it. You'll have to start learning how to fight for yourself. The USA won't be there to help you anymore, just like you weren't there for us. And then he added, go get your own oil.
Last time I checked, there was supposed to be a big bad Royal Navy that could be prepared to do things like that as well. President Trump's been willing to do the heavy lifting on behalf of the free world to address this threat of Iran. It's not just our problem set going forward, even though we have done the lion's share of preparation to ensure that that strait will be open.
American B-1 bombers are flying from RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire with the UK's permission to destroy Iranian missiles and their launchers. Clearly not enough for a president who from the outset wanted this conflict over by mid-April and who is struggling in US opinion polls. In the meantime, Israel says it has carried out more than 230 airstrikes on Iran in the last 24 hours. And with wide backing from the Israeli Jewish public, Israel's Prime Minister may be more inclined to keep on going.
We really degraded this regime, really hit them very hard, hit the IRGC, like killed thousands of these stormtroopers. So it's definitely beyond the halfway point.
Yet every night Iran's regime still calls its supporters onto the streets. It's a move meant to terrify its millions of opponents into staying at home, but also to send a message that no amount of bombing will force Iran into submission.
Despite President Trump's latest outburst, Buckingham Palace has announced that King Charles will go ahead with a state visit to the US later next month to celebrate 250 years since America rose up against our monarchy. Kieran Moodley is in Washington for us. Kieran, what more can you tell us?
Yes, Matt. I mean, it was barely an hour after President Trump issued that sort of threat saying, go and get your own oil to the UK, that it was announced that the King and Queen are coming here at the end of April for the first royal state visit in nearly 20 years. Now, was that the right decision? I mean, Sir Keir Starmer, if he hadn't have done that, he would have had an even angrier Donald Trump, and we know how much he loves a royal visit. And And look, this is a president who blows hot and cold when it comes to allies, and I think they'll be hoping that come the end of April he would have calmed down and the king can smooth over any diplomatic issues. But the question is, in a month's time, where will we be diplomatically? Because the mood music from the White House is not great when it comes to this conflict and the Strait of Hormuz. Because listening to Pete Hegseth today, it seems like they're preparing to say, look, we can declare that we've won this war and we've achieved our objectives. Missiles, we've sorted the nuclear threat, and then some sort of regime change. And on the Strait of Hormuz, well, that was never part of our plans, so you guys deal with it. Now, of course, it was never part of their plans because this has been a strategic mess from the White House. But if they did do that, it really shows an America that is a weakened superpower, one unable to deal with its own mess and leaving its allies in the lurch. And I was talking to one analyst who compared America right now to Wile E. Coyote in the cartoon, running off the cliff and now suspended in sort of gravity, not falling yet because they haven't looked down at the mess they are in. That is America right now, not looking down at the fall and what they have created. And so, look, come the end of April, relations with the UK, they might be better. And the war might be over in some sort of form. But ultimately, the economic consequences, the chaos and the distrust, that will last for a very long time.
Kieran, thanks very much indeed. Well, earlier I spoke to Peter Frankopan, a professor of global history at Oxford University. I asked him if this rupture between President Trump and his European allies was the new low.
Well, we historians, we tend to be rather sober folk. But, I think for like the rest of the world, we don't know whether to cry or laugh one minute to the next. So, I mean, it's hard to keep track of the comments that come particularly out of Washington, but to join them all up into a coherent whole and to tell yourself that this is the most powerful country on earth, changing tack seemingly by the minute, it's all slightly surreal.
But also the appeal of America was not just based on hard power and military dominance. It was based on the message, on the idea of America. And it looks as if that idea is being trampled on by this administration.
I think all of us watching and what's been going on know that this was a war started by choice. And for the US now to be signalling this afternoon that they're going to detach and that leave the strait unopened and it'll open automatically, and that the West are going to be punished for not falling into line, having not been told that there was a military confrontation coming, let alone what the consequences would be, and then being left on the hook, I think begs all sorts of questions about what it is that the so-called free world of the post-Second World War order looks like. And there are lots of other alternatives on offer at the moment. So I think once the dust settles, the question, I think, is whether the damage to US credibility is permanent or whether it's glancing. And I should just say, Matt, when I've been talking to my friends in the United States, both in Washington and elsewhere, it's been also slightly surreal in the last month to see how many of them think that the war is going really quite well and that the intervention has been a positive thing and that the economic prices to pay for closing of schools, universities, not to mention those being bombed in Iran itself, that those are prices worth paying and the world will come out the other side. So the United States sees this as in a completely different way to how we might see things here in the UK.
Do you think it's rather ironic that the king is going over to the United States to celebrate 250 years since the greatest republic on earth turned its back on our monarchy, just as the president is trying to behave a bit like a monarch himself?
That's right. The US sees itself as a republican model that is very different to what were then the monarchies, but also that the point of having a constitution, which of course we don't have in the UK, is to make sure that people understand what their obligations and their rights are. So the king, has a difficult line to thread, a different line to walk, because he's not a public diplomat. He tends not to have conferences in the White House, in the Oval Office, unlike so many other global leaders, which I think is much to his good fortune. But Trump is irascible, and I think has made a big miscalculation. It was obvious from the beginning that there was no exit strategy in play, and the key thing from the UK's point of view is that the king doesn't get embarrassed by being used as a political tool to strengthen Trump.
Well, do you think he should go at all?
I think he should go because grown-ups need to sometimes do difficult things. So I think that pulling out just shows weakness. I think that the king is perfectly well equipped to be able to pass messages along and also to listen to what it is that Trump has to say. I mean, in fact, the king helped neutralise when Trump kept talking about annexing Canada. I think some quiet words in the back channels were quite helpful.
Just finally and briefly, though, post-Brexit, the so-called special relationship with Washington was supposed to be our kind of safety blanket. And that's been somewhat shredded by Trump, hasn't it? So it leaves us, between the EU and the US, somewhat adrift.
We like to think that because we speak the same language, we see eye to eye. I mean, I think, look, what Brexit did was to show that the multilateral system was thought not to be working by those in positions of authority. And that is something that Trump has followed through on. And the honest answer is that there are plenty of people who vote who also agree with that prognosis. In my own view is that if you are in a herd of deer at dusk where there are predators out and about, you're probably safer altogether. There's some safety in numbers. I think here in the UK, our challenge is now how do we fit within the emerging new world order of predators? And I think it is a predatory world where we are at the beck and call of decisions made by other people, whether that's in Iran, where it turns out that Tehran has coercive levers that can shut down the global economy and hold it hostage. And how do we find our way out of it? But I suspect in the coming weeks and months, the situation is going to become so squeaky and so difficult for us here in Europe and in the United Kingdom that there's going to be a lot of thought about firefighting before thinking about strategy.
Peter Frankopan, thank you very much.